to go to the next, or should I start and then start? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Stormwater Utility Feasibility Study. Sorry, there's a little echo that I was trying to understand.
Mute yourself.
All right, sorry about that. That should be better now. I'm Deanna Stockton, Municipal Engineer and Deputy Administrator of Infrastructure and Operations here at Princeton. We appreciate all of you joining us tonight to learn more about stormwater utilities and the state of stormwater in Princeton. Joining us here at the table tonight is Jim Purcell, our Assistant Municipal Engineer. As well as our consultant team of Princeton Hydro WSP, and that includes Dr. Clay Emerson, Elizabeth Treadway, and Dana Patterson-Greer. I will be turning it over to the team to move us through the next slides.
Thank you, Deanna. Working good? No, we'll do this. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Let me scoot back a little bit. Right into it. All right. So, thank you all for coming out, first of all, and those online as well. Again, my name is Clay. I'm with Princeton Hydro, and I'm going to kick it off here with why you are here. And of course, you may have your own reasons, but here's kind of what this will kind of set the tone for tonight's discussion. And we will have, as you see, some slides to go through, but we are going to save a lot of time for open discussion and questions at the end. And if you have, I think with the group we have here tonight, if you have questions, specific questions on the content of the slide, if there's something that is more of a question and less of a comment as we go through this, don't hesitate to interject. We want to make sure that we're all kind of in the same place. So what you're going to learn about here today is to understand a little bit about Princeton's current stormwater program, review the New Jersey MS4 mandates that is the state handing down to the municipalities what's required of them, and that is a target that has changed here recently, as we'll discuss. And discuss Princeton's future stormwater needs and the costs associated with what needs to be done for its residents. Of course, we will also talk about a stormwater utility, what it is, what it might mean critically for your community. And the main thing is you're here to ask questions. So Dana has set up in an effort to understand where we're coming from and perhaps get the conversation started. She has set up a Menti poll. So if you're familiar with this, if you have a mobile device with you, you can go to menti.com and type in this number. It's a very quick survey question. All right, so you'll tell us what the number is.
Actually,
it's
yeah, our number changed. I apologize about that. 8475 8926. 8475 8926. Is there a way you can put that in the chat also, Deanna? And I'm going to move this onto the screen so that you can see it up here as well. So it's right here on the top, 8475 8926. Yeah, so this is an anonymous poll. We don't know who is putting the answers in. The question is, what are some stormwater issues currently happening in Princeton? So we have some answers coming in: flooding and water quality impairment, flooding, brooks, wet basements, polluted waterways, flooding on River Road, inadequate roadway drainage, stream flooding, flooding from Harry's Brook, harmful algal blooms in Lake Carney, localized flooding, too much water with impervious surfaces and climate change, dirty water. We'll just give folks a couple more minutes. There's some folks joining us virtually as well. Again, menti.com, 84758926 is the code. All right, should we have the next question? There's only one more question. Quick poll. So in one word, what is your vision for stormwater management in Princeton? And it should allow you to have 3 words that you can add in. Yeah. Answers are coming in. So we have some words coming in: sustainable, fair, green, healthy, incentive, functional, effective, control, aligned, dry basements, adequate, reduced, green infrastructure, no flooding. Excellent. All right, that's the same number of folks who have participated in the last question. Excellent. Well, thank you for participating. We appreciate your input on this. So that is the end of the poll. And we will get back to the presentation.
All right, so some very obvious trends in the first, with the first question, and some consistent lines of thought in the second one as well. Flooding was mentioned in the majority of those comments, some comments about water quality as well. So no surprise there, but thank you for your participation in that. Stormwater in New Jersey, kind of to continue on with some of the thoughts that you shared there. The thing that's in the news most often, and for good reason, is flooding. And it's not the kind of flooding, I think, in my opinion, that we've, as a society, been used to. It's a little bit different in nature. So these short, intense storms overwhelm existing drainage systems. I mean, obviously, we still have the threat of larger tropical systems like Hurricane Ida that was so destructive across the state. But we're also plagued with these small no-name thunderstorms that are causing serious issues, both property damage, interruption of services, and public safety concerns. Runoff is increasing as a result of those storms, the rainfall distribution, and of course also with an increase in impervious cover and changes in land surfaces, that has another exacerbation of that flooding impacts from those storms. Another comment that was mentioned, I think, at least twice in that short poll was water quality concerns associated with runoff, stream pollution, And of course, this is the same place that we get our drinking water in many instances. And the stormwater infrastructure, like the rest of us, isn't getting any younger, unfortunately. And so that's a never-ending battle for municipalities across the state. So some things are happening on the regulatory front to address these issues that you're experiencing here in Princeton and the state as a whole is experiencing. Stormwater regulations have been changing in 2021. Some more changes are on the horizon. They're beginning to reflect the changes in precipitation that we've experienced in the past and in the future. And then the MS4, that's an acronym, I apologize for the acronym, but that's your municipal separate storm sewer system. And that's a permit that the state issues to municipalities has changed and has given new requirements to municipalities like your own. So this probably isn't news to anyone in this room, especially considering the feedback in the Menti poll. But especially in the Northeast, the U.S. is experiencing, that portion of the U.S. is experiencing increases in very heavy precipitation events. So it's not necessarily the total annual amount of precipitation, it's the distribution or the rate that it falls at. So we're getting these shorter duration, but highly intense storms. So that stresses our rivers, our streams, but it also travels further up into the drainage system to the inlets in your road, the pipes that serve those inlets at the end of your street, and so on and so forth. And as CO2 emissions continue to rise, we're not experiencing a new normal climate. We're in a period where that climate is still a moving target, and I think that's what we unfortunately need to understand. So getting back to the local level, I'm going to hand it back to Deanna to talk about stormwater specifically in Princeton.
Thank you, Clay. So why are we here? The municipality of Princeton maintains a stormwater system that has over 3,000 inlets, connecting with pipes to over 300 outfalls to water bodies. And it's been determined through water quality analysis that many of our waterways, Harry's Brook and Stony Brook, are impaired in terms of quality. That's from pollutants that are in the stormwater that then enter into those waterways. We also have the challenges that our water bodies also just cannot handle the amount of rainfall runoff that is occurring and causing the flooding problems like shown on the screen. Additionally, our Public Works Department of approximately 50 people is just one of the groups that is responsible to take care of all of the infrastructure in Princeton, whether it be roads, our urban forest, our sanitary sewers. So there's quite a lot on their plate for them to have to do in addition to reacting to issues with our storm sewer system. So in terms of the stormwater system, there's inlet and ditch cleaning, maintenance, and replacement. We have a very active street sweeping program. And as we're in the fall of the year, I think everybody is aware that our leaf, branch, and log collections are also quite expansive to manage the leaf and other debris that go into our streets and then ultimately can get into our storm sewer systems. Because of all of the infrastructure that we're responsible for, it's often a reactive maintenance. The stormwater permit referred to by Clay is becoming more stringent, and that is requiring even more effort and manpower to put us in compliance with that annual permit. Next slide. I think, yep. Okay. In addition to the regular maintenance, we also have infrastructure projects, capital projects to repair and replace storm sewer pipes and structures. And also we are putting out public education and communication as much as possible to educate the public as to why we are doing certain things. Jim will tell me before he came to Princeton that he always wondered why our roads are so bad. And part of that discussion is that when we do a road project, we look at all of the infrastructure that's under that road. It's not just putting a nice layer of asphalt on the top. We also look at, for us, it's the sanitary sewer and the storm sewer. You know, are those two pieces of infrastructure that need work while we are there repairing the surface? And then we also work with our other utilities like water and gas to combine their improvements as well. So there's a lot that our public works staff are involved with related to our infrastructure, but also Jim and I, our engineering department, in putting together projects to make improvements to probably over 180 miles of piping at least. We have 120 miles of roads, so we're still mapping our storm sewer system to get the final number. But it's a lot of work, and as you'll see in the next slide, we don't have a dedicated funding source to do the work that's necessary, one, to keep us in compliance with our permit for water quality, but also just to address our infrastructure needs. We have there's a cap on the operational budget, so it's not like we can go out and hire 5 new people to create a new crew that is solely dedicated to stormwater. That's challenging within that cap. As I said, our staff is also pulled to do other things, not just storm sewer. We also, our sanitary sewer crew is often out there helping us when we need to do inlet cleaning work. So then they're pulled away from the sanitary sewer work that they should be working on. Our budget is funded out of property tax, so while council has been dedicating quite a bit of money in the last few years to get us better funded so that our the needs that have been set aside can be funded at a higher rate. We still are behind in doing all of the work that's necessary because there's a competition for dollars. It's not just the storm sewer, it's the roads, it's a firehouse, it's the HVAC system in our building, it's, you know, a pedestrian sidewalk or a pedestrian bridge project. So there's competition for those dollars, and as it's property taxes as well, the property taxes only are levied against certain groups, right? You have the schools, government itself, churches don't pay taxes, but yet they all have impervious surface that has stormwater runoff associated with it that has to be managed and treated through our public system. So back to you, Clay.
Thanks, Deanna. What is a stormwater utility, I guess, is maybe the question that we're all here to answer and to understand. And some of you have probably heard of this before. I know, in fact, some of you have heard about this before. But it's okay if you haven't. And in general, on its most basic level, it's like other utilities. It's a user fee collected for a specific service. Fees are collected proportional to some measure of use, which is not as easy as a water meter in this case, but not much more complicated. And a user or fee-paying public receives said benefits of the use. And like with any utility, users have the ability to reduce their use and receive a commensurate reduction in their fee. So the concept is a dedicated and transparent fee for service. Now, these two photos here are photos that I've taken, and I think that the one in the top right is what we like to think is the status of our water resources in the state of New Jersey. That picture is taken in the state of New Jersey in a relatively urbanized area, but that's really not the reality. The reality is in a lot of our built environment is the lower photo, which I think summarizes a lot of the concerns that have been raised here tonight in the poll. You have the aging metal pipe, the end of which has washed downstream. You have the stream bank erosion, and you have the turbid water in the stream as a result of that stream bank erosion from development that predated stormwater rules and a changing climate. So a utility is one way to address the multitude of concerns in that lower photo. And if you're not familiar with a stormwater utility, you have a good excuse, and that excuse is that they weren't a thing in New Jersey until relatively recently. 2019, the New Jersey Clean Stormwater and Flood Reduction Act was passed. It authorizes but does not require the establishment of stormwater utilities. But it provides authority for a dedicated funding source to be used only for stormwater management purposes. And again, that was in 2019. Some other things happened right around that time. But at this point, many communities are looking into this as an option. And there has been at least one adoption to date, but many other communities are kind of in the same state that yours is in looking at what this might be. So, is it a new thing? As I suggested there, no and yes. On a nationwide level, it's not a new thing. I think New Jersey, unfortunately, here is a little bit behind the times. I think there are maybe 6 or 7 other states that don't have a utility somewhere within the state, in addition to New Jersey. So most states, as you can see here, have some number of utilities, and I think that they're approaching about 2,500, probably getting closer to 3,000 at this point. And they go back to, I think, early 70s, 1972 maybe. And the type of communities that that use stormwater utilities go from, big cities to communities with less than 100 people, I believe, on the small end. So it's new to New Jersey, but not necessarily a new thing. And there are a number just over the river. So some of the benefits, what could this bring to a community? This is another photo from a community a city that does have a stormwater utility, some stormwater infrastructure there, not maybe what you'd expect it to look like, but it provides a dedicated and stable revenue for stormwater management purposes. So Deanna just talked about the challenges faced by the community in terms of, the challenges themselves and then the funding. And what this does is provides a community with the ability to be more proactive. A lot of municipalities throughout the state are playing an infinite game of whack-a-mole when it comes to drainage, because we have this infrastructure that may be 30 years old, maybe 100 years old. And as I said, it's not getting any newer. There's a lot of structures that are well beyond their anticipated life span. And they don't get the attention that a bridge crossing might, and for good reason. We understand there are priorities, but this is one that the utility provides a tool for municipalities to catalog, to understand and to direct instead of throwing a Band-Aid on things, understand when things are going to go from bad to worse and plan to address them before it becomes a crisis. And also, and importantly, and a couple of these points were raised, it does provide a mechanism to improve water quality and public safety. So, with that being said, what can they be used for? And again, it needs to be related per the legislation. This has to be a dedicated fund for stormwater management purposes. But that list is, in my opinion, relatively long here. And I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but you can see some of the highlighting here. Obviously, the bigger nuts that are harder to crack for municipalities like Princeton, where you can plan and address these larger capital expenditures, regular operation and maintenance that Deanna talked about, and then also some things that might not be as obvious: monitoring, inspection, and enforcement, planning, public education and outreach. These things can make a difference. And I think perhaps one of the most valuable things here is that having that proactive approach, that program, can make your community give you leverage when it comes to matching funds for grants or low interest loans from different agencies. So I think that's perhaps one of the biggest benefits. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth Treadway, our partner team member here, to talk about the feasibility study itself and some of the findings to date.
Thank you, Clay, and delighted to be here with you and see so many faces in the crowd. So thank you for taking time out of your evening to be here and listen to us, and hopefully we'll be able to have a good conversation as we work through informing you on where we are in this process. So a feasibility study is nothing, like earth-shattering kind of process. It's asking all those who, what, where, when, how, what does it cost questions. We want to understand in the process of the study what is happening now, what is not getting done, what are the resources that can be brought to bear. You heard Deanna talking about the often conflicting roles that a public works department has. I'm a former public works director, and I certainly appreciate all the times you have to keep all the balls in the air, and yes, some of them absolutely do fall to the floor. So we have been spending our time really talking to a lot of folks, listening to a lot of folks. The public is an important piece of that. We interact with a group of citizens. Several of you are here tonight. We thank you for being here, who have become quite the many experts in all of what we've been working through, and the feedback is really critical. We are reaching out during this period also to talk to additional stakeholders, to get feedback, to understand what it is, just the simple question we asked this evening. What is it that you value? What are those important words that you put up on the screen? We're trying to learn all of that, immerse ourselves. This is a partnership study. And I don't mean because we're two firms together working on it. It's a partnership because we do this with the community. We are not coming with a solution that we would recommend. This is your solution. And so things like this evening's meeting is important in this first step, understanding what's going on, being able then to build a framework for the future. What do we do going forward? So how do we do this? We have 4 phases to this analysis. We are in the second phase of the project. The first phase was where we were asking all of those who, what, when, where, how questions. The second phase, we are delving more deeply into what should it be? What policies ought to be incorporated? How do we fund things going forward? When we evaluate the use of a utility, we don't evaluate it in terms of it's the end-all, be-all, do-all, it's going to solve all the problems. We look at a utility as a functioning business in which all revenue sources are tapped, not simply the concept of user fees, but partnership with grants, partnership with loans, partnership with other agencies. Use every resource available to you, but do it in a way that in a utility structure has a cohesive path forward. And that's one of the beauties, and as Clay pointed out, it gives that functional foundation. What is it we're trying to accomplish? What are the resources that we need? How do we move forward? And so these 4 phases are to help us get to that end process. Ultimately, it is the council's decision. And so our purpose is to frame the questions, gather the information, evaluate it, use our experience, share what we know has worked, what has not worked in other communities, appreciate that Princeton is unique. It is not New Brunswick. New Brunswick has adopted a utility. These are not comparable. The organizations are not, the communities are not, the needs are not. But the process that we take a community through is the same. It doesn't matter what the name of the community is. Because the bottom line is, whatever comes out of this has to be Princeton's. It's not some other community's solution. It has to be Princeton's. So, how are we going about this? The elements that we are currently engaged in is a lot of continuing outreach, expanding the universe of who we're talking to, being able to not only gather information in a one-way method, but to have dialogue. And so we continue the process of facilitating conversations, of gathering information, analyzing what we're hearing against what we see as professionals in the business of what does need to get done, what are the priorities that should be considered. And so we ask of the public, what are your priorities? It was interesting to see the kinds of responses that you provided to us. We are going to continue this over the next couple of months of outreach to get that information. Policies need to be reviewed at this point. So as we're working on what we think are operational solutions, we are working on how do you execute those? How do we execute them within the framework of the law that was passed? And I have shared this comment a number of times to groups that I have spoken to. You have one of the most effectively well-written authorizations to set up a utility that I've had the opportunity to work with. And I've worked all over the United States and Canada. I've been at this for 35 years. So I absolutely appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into empowering the local government to make these funding decisions. You have a very effective piece of legislation. So it's a powerful thing to be able to go forward. Within that legislation, there are trigger points of policy that need to be developed, and we're working with staff right now to move us into those frameworks that can be recommended going forward. In phase 1, which we probably could have started with that, let's flip to what did we find in phase 1, since we're already into phase 2. The things that were really important in phase 1 was to capture from the who, what, when, where, how, what's going on today, what services are being provided, and what is the expenditure level. Now, this is a snapshot in time. Expenditures go up and down. As Deanna pointed out, the stormwater program is in competition with everyone else who has needs, everyone in the sense of programs that are funded through the municipality. And so this 700 and, what is the number? Thank you, $60,000 is just a snapshot in time. Any number of years you could see that number considerably lower or considerably higher. This is not taking into consideration the capital investment that needs to be made. These are operating costs. These are people. These are equipment. This is consumable supplies, materials, computer. These are the things that an organization has to have in order to execute a body of work. And so, again, those numbers can go up and down by what the priority of that particular fiscal year is. When we start to bring capital into this picture, that number goes up in multiple millions. You have a very robust infrastructure, as Deanna pointed out. The number and type of hardened infrastructure, pipes, ditches, swales, things that require cleaning, maintenance, inlets, catch basins, all of those things that are necessary to run a drainage network is a considerable investment. When it fails, and you're in a reactive mode, you are not being able to be the most efficient that you'd like to be. Think about your own car, right? We do routine maintenance, everything's running along, and then bam, it doesn't start. And suddenly you discover that oil change you were supposed to make, and oh, yep, I forgot to do that, and it's been now too long, something seized up, and you're going to pay a lot more money. Had the routine maintenance continued, perhaps that would not be the failure that you're dealing with. So you can appreciate that when you're in a reactive mode, and that's where Princeton is, from an ongoing operation, from a maintenance perspective, they react to the conditions around them. It is not, they're not at this point in a position to think long-term. What a utility allows them to do is think long-term. You can do strategic planning of how you're going to change your maintenance and delivery services, but you have to know the money's coming. Or the planning, unfortunately, in our business, we do a lot of planning for communities, and we give them great reports and information, and where does it go? It sits up on a shelf because what's not matching it is the money. So the bottom line is it's the money, right? It's being able to do, whether you're talking about, painting your house, which is something that's on my list of to-dos, or whether you're talking about repairing an underground pipe. It's understanding that you have the resources and a plan to go forward. So when we looked at what is on the horizon, we looked at a 5-year kind of forecast out. What does need to get done? We've mentioned a number of times their municipal separate storm sewer system permit. We refer to it in jargon an MS4. That permit was reissued January 1 of 2023. It is a 5-year permit. Its intent, as issued by DEP, is that at the end of 5 years, everything has been accomplished. Well, the everything in this permit is quite a workload. Deanna referred to the fact that you have street sweeping, but it requires you increase it by 50%. And that you take on streets that you've not swept before. That has to be underway within the next 14 months. What does that mean? Do you have the equipment? Do you have the manpower? Can you dedicate those resources that you currently have that are perhaps assigned to do something different. Can you commit that you can meet that sweeping schedule? So while we're out sweeping, by the way, we want you to inspect those inlets every year. How many inlets? 3,000. How do we know that we inspected them? There has to be some justification for the fact that the state wants you to send in a report. They want data that says we need to be able to stand up proudly and say and prove that was done. We now want you to go look not only at your outfalls, but what damage are you doing to the streams at those outfalls? What scouring is occurring? Oh, by the way, you found the scouring. We expect you to fix it. So you can see that this permit is now a layer above what was being done. It's not that these are all new things. It's that they are the next priority of what you have been doing. Now we're going to take you another step further. This is the philosophy of these permits. The federal rules were issued in 1990. Every permit cycle is another layer of complexity. So we have a lot to think about. We put just a few of the items on this slide, but it goes on in small print, front to back pages of items that have to be completed. It's quite a list. Yes, there's a 5-year window to get it all done, but you know that the next one coming is not going to be take a deep breath, okay, you can skate. You know the state's coming with the next level of what they expect. One of the most valuable pieces in this mandate, the intent that it is valuable, is watershed planning. And so it's a 3-phase process. The ultimate then will inform what needs to be done in all the watersheds. That's the bottom line intent. By the end of 5 years, now we've got our next 5-year game plan. So it's important to recognize that those goals that you put up on the screen, that water quality goal, that improvement within the community, the health, safety, those things are being driven regulatorily more today than they were when those permits were first being put out. So we asked ourselves collectively, with all of the partners we've been talking to, do we have enough resources today to meet the needs, the mandates, the system demands? And the answer was pretty straightforward. No. Absolutely no. There are resource needs, there are priorities, there are decisions that are going to have to be made, and they're tough. So who should pay? There's the critical question. So why are we doing this study? Is to help answer that question. Who should pay? And in order to answer that question, we asked ourselves, who's currently paying? Not just taxpayers, but let's take a look at who actually is making a financial contribution, resources that can be used. And an interesting story is told in this graphic. To the left, what you see is the who currently pays. This is by land use. This is not zeroing in on your house or your business. This is by land use. Where are these resources coming from? And you can see in that graphic, prominent contribution is from residents. So when you ask the who pays now, You also asked the companion question, how that would change if a utility was put in place. Again, go back to the legislation. What is the authorizing factor in the legislation on how to bill a fee out to the landowners? And it is hardened surfaces, impervious area, buildings, sidewalks, parking, rooftops, tennis courts. It's all of the things that stop Mother Nature from solving our stormwater problem, because it generates flow. That flow has to go someplace, and the public now is responsible for managing it. If we took Princeton off the map, all the buildings are gone, all the people are gone, we restore it back to Mother Nature managing this, we've learned that it doesn't take long and Mother Nature will figure it out. But we like living in Princeton. We like the amenities of our lifestyle and things that we want to be able to do collectively together as humans. And so we need to figure out what to do with all of this stormwater. So everybody is contributing to the problem by varying degrees, but everybody is a part of the problem. So when we look at the right-hand side and we take the barrier away that it can only be those who are paying property taxes, and we put everybody into the barrel with us, now we see a significant shift as to the who pays. The law does not allow for exemption from the responsibility to contribute, except for agriculture and silviculture that meets the test of business. There's a citation of the law that defines those two land use classifications. Everybody else is in. Everybody. Everybody. Local government, state government, federal government, nonprofits, churches, schools, institutions, hospitals. Everybody is in the bucket. And so you can see this significant shift away from it only primarily being the responsibility of the residential population. Now everybody gets their fair share. And that's the kind of question that we're working on now. That's kind of, and I'm going to stop talking here because what are we doing? At this stage, we are working to define then what should this program look like? What are the activities? What are the accomplishments we're trying to achieve? What are the resources it's going to take for us to get there? Resources in terms of people, materials, supplies, equipment, capital investment. What is that total cost going to look like at a level of service that we define in 4 major categories? It is a utility. There is an administrative function that needs to be recognized. The state recognizes it by requiring a designated stormwater program coordinator. That's not through utility law. That's through DEP's environmental requirements. That person has to carry certain responsibilities, has to be trained in a certain manner. One of the things that we value is a utility can be administratively burdensome. The law allows great flexibility in how the utility is administered. It can be set up as a separate authority, but it also can operate as a business inside the local government without adding that layer of bureaucracy that would require its own governing body, its own policies on personnel, its own operations to send out bills and collect money and those kinds of things. We are trying to minimize those in our evaluation by incorporating a strategy that says this becomes a routine part of business. But we do know that there's an administrative burden. There still has to be accountability to the ratepayers, someone who's coordinating and executing the program and keeps all the parts moving as necessary. We also are looking at then what is the maintenance cost of the infrastructure. And in that maintenance cost are significant pieces of these permit requirements. So we've evaluated all of the things that need to be done from a maintenance perspective, not only to meet the permit, which is significant, but also just general maintenance. To move from a reactive environment over time to being more proactive, and what are the steps that it would take for us to get ahead of the game. This is very engineering heavy in the sense, I mean that in a positive way, in that there are important bodies of knowledge that already are out there. But we do need to call on the engineering community, and we need to have a capital investment program. So that's what we're working on. Our purpose is to refine that, build the cost model, give options, and I'm about to cough. I apologize. I don't know why, but it's there. And so I'm going to ask someone else to pick up this last slide of where we are and where we're going. Excuse me.
Sure. So our next steps, okay, you got the calendar up there. You can see that's already been pointed out, that today isn't day one. There's been some work that's already been done, and we're thankful for members of the focus group. You'll see a number of focus group meetings up there in kind of an orange color. And we've had a number of those already. And here we are at the first open public meeting. And there will be another one that is currently scheduled for January of next year. And I think, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier when she kind of laid this out, the different phases. Each phase is an independent phase. And what I mean by that is, at the end of the phase, the council, as Elizabeth pointed out, has the ultimate decision whether to move, not to implement a stormwater utility. Of course, they have that as well, as she mentioned, but also to whether or not to go on to the next phase of the study. So it was a very well thought out process that has a go, no-go decision at each stage. And so the next council meeting with a decision whether or not to move from phase 2, the current one, to phase 3 will be in March of 2025. So that's, I mean, there's more to this. You can see it, but that's kind of where we are with the schedule, unless there's something else you wanted to add to that, Elizabeth?
Just wanted to quickly add, the purpose of the public meetings and our focus group meetings and stakeholder meetings is to take your feedback and incorporate that into the future projections model. So your comments today, comments from the focus group, comments from our stakeholder meetings, they're all being considered as part of this process and taken into consideration. So that's why we really want to hear from you today, and we hope that you have a lot of questions or comments about this process.
That brings us to, questions, open discussion, and hopefully that'll work for us this time. Otherwise, I can probably get this up there. So, Yeah, well, yeah. Sounds like it works. So I know we covered a lot of material, and I appreciate your attention. But this is your chance. If you have any questions, things that weren't clear, general comments. I mean, we got the feedback from the brief Menti poll, but I know people in here have more to say than that. And I think also, Deanna, if I think we're happy to, you know, if you haven't formulated your thoughts, I mean, you can reach out through Deanna with comments, you know, after the meeting as well. So the floor is yours. I've heard myself talk too much already tonight. I'm not going to say anything about Elizabeth, but I enjoy listening to her more than I do myself. So yeah, any comments? I see a hand in the back, and then I'll come back to you, Jim.
So you mentioned that there are more heavy storm events currently than there have been in the past, and this seems to be a trend that's likely to continue into the future. What happens when we get storm events is that we get dramatically increased flows in our sanitary sewer system. So essentially we are dealing with heavy rain events by diverting the rain into the sanitary sewer system. It's expensive, it's inefficient. We have a leaky sanitary sewer system that needs to be fixed. That will address part of the problem. But an effective stormwater system will also help in that process. You also mentioned that interfering with Mother Nature causes unforeseen difficulties. And I'm not a scientist, but one of the ways that we've interfered with Mother Nature in our drainage system is by putting a dam on the Millstone River that created Carnegie Lake. If you look at the dam, you can see that Carnegie Lake is you know, several feet above what would have otherwise been the level of the Millstone River as it flows by the dam. That higher water level creates backups in the Stony Brook, in Harry's Brook, creating flooding in parts of the town. It's not the source of flooding all across the town. There are localized issues as well. But is there a way to get the owner of Carnegie Lake to pay into the stormwater utility to address the problems that the dam creates? Or is that something that is not allowed under state law?
There's a little bit to process there. I am familiar with the dam, of course. I'm sure everyone here is. I'd like to say the short answer is well, number one, I guess the owner of Carnegie Lake they own more than just the dam and the lake itself. They do also own a lot of impervious cover, and they would be a fee-paying user of the utility if it were to be adopted. So that's probably the biggest, quickest answer to your question. In terms of the flooding that might be exacerbated by the presence of the dam itself from a hydraulic standpoint, that is quantifiable. So depending on the storm in question, whether it's the 2-year storm or the 100-year storm, depending on how intense it is, we can understand where the reach of that impact of that dam, you know, how far up gradient, up not just the main stem, but the small tributaries, up the stormwater pipes themselves, how far up that hydraulic influence is of that dam, and that's something that could be addressed with the potential utility is understanding the hydraulics of that. So definitely a lot to unpackage here. I think it's a great comment. But there's a fair amount of topography. I would think that impact is relatively close to the lake, but the lake is large, to your point. There's a lot of things that happen in the lengths of that lake that that dam could be partially a contributing factor. I also think your first comment about the sanitary sewer is another good one. You're fortunate that you don't have a combined sewer, but all sewers are a little bit combined, right? That problem of increased flow and the cost associated with managing that from a wastewater treatment standpoint is not unique. And I think it was a good comment, and you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said, that a stormwater utility could help ensure that separation. And you also, in Princeton, have relatively shallow depth to groundwater, and we saw some comments about basements in there as well. And so that combination of things, and an aging sanitary sewer system, a shallow depth to groundwater, is the perfect combination for the problem that you outlined. So, Deanna, is there anything you want to add to that response? There's certainly a lot there.
Yeah, and probably for disclosure, David has been the chair of our sanitary, or the sewer operating committee for about the last 20 years, and sits on the Stony Brook Regional Sewerage Authority Board as well.
Now you tell me.
David is an expert on our sanitary sewer system, and we've estimated that in the sanitary sewer system, 60% of the flow is not sewage, that it's either stormwater or groundwater. And that was part of what I was alluding to, is that council has made a commitment until I think 2031 to try to put more money into all of the deferred work. So they had committed $30 million over 10 years to address the I&I issues. That's the inflow and infiltration of stormwater and groundwater, to make the sanitary sewer more tight, which would hopefully put off the need to expand the sewer treatment plant, the Stony Brook treatment plant, but it would also work to reduce the cost of our collection system in transporting that waste to the treatment plant. We do have 11 pump stations, so there is energy and other resources that are needed to transport the waste that we have. So the efforts that we're doing on the sanitary sewer side hopefully will defer bigger projects to be necessary. But then it does play into the stormwater system as well, because when you make that sanitary watertight, you may have higher groundwater, which means your stormwater is not absorbing into the ground as much. So it's all kind of a system that has to work together.
Well, and having the stormwater in a utility operation, again, primary benefit is you can plan. You can build expectations that you can invest in and solve issues. And so if you had a user fee established within stormwater, as you do in the sewer side, they can partner together. It doesn't have to be all on the burden of one. It can be partnered appropriately, where you're working on also improving the capacity flow within stormwater, so it doesn't have to be partnered with wastewater in a negative way, so that the infiltration rate can be reduced. I mean, these are two big infrastructures. They do have impacts potentially on each other, but stormwater typically is the bad guy when it comes to the sewer system. And so there is an opportunity to put dollars to work in partnership even more effectively in addressing both of their needs when you can plan for the future.
Good evening. I'm Jim Cosgrove. I'm here tonight as a resident of Princeton, but full disclosure, I'm also an engineer with a specialty in stormwater management. First, let me start with a compliment. I think you guys did a phenomenal job laying this out. Very clearly presented. Really, I'm very impressed with the way you laid this out. And Deanna, I think you did a great job convincing me that the only way to move forward here is with a stormwater utility, because I don't believe you can possibly accomplish what you're going to need to accomplish with the funding sources that you have now. If you tell the taxpayers what they need to pay in order to get you the money that you're going to be required, not that you would like to spend, what you are going to be required to spend, the 2% cap is going to kill that, first of all. But even if it didn't, if you told people how much their taxes were going to increase, they wouldn't like that either. So the way I look at this, as you've so well defined this tonight, the stormwater utility is the way to go. And I'm assuming, let me ask a question, phase 3, is that the implementation phase? Okay.
Yes.
So I guess the point I'd like to convey today is that I will strongly encourage the governing body to move forward with phase 3 here, because I really think Princeton always goes above what they're required to do. Even if they only wanted to go to what they were required to do, I think you need the stormwater utility. But knowing how Princeton likes to do things, I think you really need the stormwater utility here. Princeton likes to plan, and there's no way they're going to be able to plan without this, in my opinion, with the funding that would be available. So thank you for your hard work. I know what it takes to do this. It's a lot of meetings, a lot of time, and I think so far you've done a great job. Thank you.
Good evening. So I'm not here as a Princeton resident, although I grew up in Princeton, and proud to say that. And I went to college in Princeton. But I'm here, I'm Jim Waltman, I'm here as the Executive Director of the Watershed Institute, and this is just to continue the Love Fest. And I want to thank you for the work you've already done. Was Mrs. Treadwell, do I have that? Treadway, I'm sorry. I also want to thank you for pointing out the importance of watershed planning. We agree that's one of the most important elements of the new MS4 permits. And I want to commend the town of Princeton for working in collaboration with other towns to try to kind of conceive of and then really actively pursue regional watershed planning in association with other municipalities. We can't do this town by town ourselves, and I think you're on the right trajectory on that. Finally, I just want to thank you for the work you've done over the many years now to not just comply with the regulations handed down by the state DEP, but being creative and being more ambitious than what DEP requires in your municipal stormwater ordinance. So I'll just echo the other gyms. We got 3 gyms that all have a passion for stormwater here tonight. We strongly encourage you to stay on this trajectory and work towards that next phase of the stormwater utility. So thank you very much.
I was going to say, in terms of watershed planning, you don't have to, you can stay up. You know, we have municipal boundaries and county boundaries. Well, watersheds don't know what those are. So, for example, the Stony Brook watershed, I think it covers, Jim, I should look at you, 6 different municipalities, and Princeton is at the tail end of it. There's no way that Princeton on our own can manage all of that comes to us. We have to work in partnership with all of the upstream municipalities, because that's probably where a lot of the bang for the buck will be to manage the stormwater before it comes to us. We're also starting to do a collaboration on the Cherry Run watershed, which is a very, very slim piece along Cherry Valley Road for us, and a little bit over with Van Horn Brook. But again, you know, we can't work in a silo on these things. We have to work with the other surrounding communities so that we can share the burden, we can share the costs, and find the solutions together.
Well, I can continue with the appreciation theme, however. I'm Anna Marie Lyles. I live in walking distance, but I came tonight representing Friends of Princeton Open Space. And so I feel, even though I grew up in a family full of civil engineers, and we do a lot of pipes and concrete, but I would like to just say I was very happy to learn in some of the earlier focus group meetings that natural solutions can be part of these utilities. I just want to highlight that because green infrastructure is a really important part of the solution, and I appreciate that that's going to be part of the planning.
Paul Shore from Harrisbrook and a resident of Princeton. And before this, I was an engineer with NJDEP and worked with Jim Cosgrove. So I'm familiar with all that great work that not only you have done, but also the work that Princeton Hydro has done and from the past. 3 quick recommendations. One, take this opportunity in this super dry spell to quantify the inflow to the Princeton Stony Brook Regional Sewage Authority, recognizing that the difference between now and when it rains again will represent the amount of inflow that may or may not be due to infiltration. So it's an unusual opportunity, but it's a simple one to deal with. And it can be also compared to the past events. So if you're talking about 10 million gallons a day going to Stony Brook regularly, and now it's 8, then you know how much inflow you have to deal with. Secondly, in terms of municipal utility authorities, I remember from back in the 70s that there's a municipal utility authority statute that allows municipalities, and it may be utilities, there are a couple of names that flow around, to have jurisdictions that are not that don't encompass the entire municipality, that may actually be for a portion of that where was sewered as opposed to the unsewered. Now, it's a different story here, but we are not dealing in Harrisbrook with necessarily a large backwater event from Carnegie Lake or Stony Brook. We're dealing with mainly the downtown drainage that used to go into Harrisbrook and is now storm sewered. So jurisdictional issues may allow the concept of a utility authority to be more directed towards the actual demands for mitigation, if I want to call it that. Thirdly, credits. I noticed that you have some credits that you may give, and I thought the issues of credits might be more generous, but it looks like you're only trying to mitigate some of the user fee costs through credits. And in our backyard, along with other people in Harrisbrook, which was a drained, swampy area before it was developed, there were swales and there were farm soil pipe that help drain the land. Those are still there, and they still work effectively sometimes if they haven't been clogged with roots and other things. But an above-ground swale can help reduce at least the very surface underground water table. And in Harrisbrook area, we have a clay layer that is like 8 feet thick. and it allows for, it doesn't allow for any underground drainage, seepage. So it sets a limit on how much a swale can actually, an above-ground swale can actually accomplish. But I do think if you can shave off 2 or 3 inches of rainfall through recharge, that's a lot. Although what we read now in terms of maximum rainfall rates is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 inches of rain coming down in an event which would overwhelm almost everything. But if you can shave off 2 or 3 inches, you may have an inexpensive way of preventing at least some of the damages that are occurring from upstream. Then lastly, about the coordination with watershed. The Delaware and Raritan Canal Commission recently received some funding from the state, I think it was about $700,000, that would enable them to do a new master plan. So the DNR Canal Commission is embarking fairly rapidly with a scope of work. And I would like the Watershed Institute to keep us apprised of how that's working. The Watershed Institute is separate from the DNR Canal Commission, but the fact that the the DNR Canal Commission has regulatory authority over land and may be able to deal with that in a much more effective way than anything Princeton could do, or even through intermunicipal agreements, should be explored. Thank you very much.
Since the question was asked, and we have had a very dry month, the month of September, for which we have data, was very dry. The average flow at the River Road Treatment Plant from Princeton, South Brunswick, and West Windsor combined, and South Brunswick includes parts of Plainsboro, during the previous 12 months, ending in September, the average gallons per day was a little over 10 million. In September, it was a little under 7 million. So on average, during that year, and it was a fairly typical year when it came to rainfall, notwithstanding the dry month, we have about 30% extraneous flow coming into Stony Brook. West Windsor is not a large contributor of extraneous flow. They have a different geology, a lot of sandy soil, and a relatively new system. Princeton and South Brunswick are the primary contributors, and when you consider that it's 30% on average, the storm events, and especially the high groundwater events, which tend to occur in snowy, wet springs, are the major contributors.
If there's anyone joining us virtually, if you want to raise your hand, feel free to chime in with a question or a comment.
Adam, can you let Maria in? Hi, Maria, you can unmute. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Maria Juega, a resident of Grover Avenue. I am a total novice at this subject, and I'm very interested to hear all the comments that have been made. My question is related to what kind of efforts have been made to try to, as I think it's been mentioned, partner with other municipalities around us to make this happen. I would share the concern that this is something we cannot do alone, and that obviously watersheds don't know of municipal boundaries. So it would appear that have any conversations taken place between Princeton, Montgomery, West Windsor to do this as a joint effort?
Yes, Maria, we have. So there's two different components. One component is the pipe and inlets and the infrastructure, the hard infrastructure that Princeton owns and is required to maintain and, plan to improve. That, while there are some interconnections, like with, say, the piping that's on Route 27 on the state highway, that's solely, for the most part, carries our stormwater that's generated in Princeton. The other component that we talked about are watersheds, and that more relates to the streams and the water that is carried in streams. And so we are in conversation on the Stony Brook watershed with Lawrence, Pennington, Hopewell, East and West Amwell. Hopefully I've gotten them all. Thank you, Jim. And that conversation, I think we've been meeting a couple of years now. And so we're now looking, once all of the municipalities get our systems mapped, we are looking to have a watershed management plan that we collectively hire a consultant to work on, so that it is a joint plan that covers all of the municipalities. It will we'll be doing water quality analysis as part of that, and then putting together plans for projects that will make the necessary improvements. There will be, while the focus is water quality, it will also have benefit on quantity, just by the nature of some of the strategies that we can employ to improve the water quality. We just had our first meeting, I think 2 weeks ago, with the Lower Millstone watershed. That includes, I'm trying to think of everybody that was there, Manville, Raritan, Princeton, Montgomery, Hillsborough. We're starting that process now with that group as well. So it'd be the same thing, that we'll be looking at where there are opportunities to create projects jointly to improve water quality and quantity issues. So yes, we are working on it. Harry's Brook is solely contained within Princeton, so we will be doing a watershed improvement plan for ourselves on that watershed, I think. Yeah, there's a couple of other small watersheds, but they are pretty much solely within Princeton. So yes, we're definitely looking at the watershed planning, and the costs associated with some of those improvement projects could possibly then be built into a stormwater utility for long-term repayment. So yes, the two can go together. We are having those regional conversations. It's just more on a watershed planning rather than an infrastructure maintenance. I hope that answered your question. Anyone else on Zoom with questions?
Hi, my name is Jody, and I also live on Harry's Brook. We're neighbors. I would like to know if there is an updated flood map. We spoke a few times.
Yes, not yet. As I explained at the Flood and Stormwater Commission meeting, the Federal Emergency Management Agency that reviews the flood studies before issuing a modified flood insurance rate map changed consultants in midstream, review consultants. We had intended to have a public hearing on the Harry's Brook flood insurance rate map modification last month. But that new consultant took another look at the study and determined, believe it or not, never heard this before, there was too much data. So they asked our consultant to go back and reduce the amount of data that they were providing to the federal government. So our consultant is almost done with that, and we'll be getting the new. It's basically the cross sections that they gave to FEMA to review had too many points associated with them. So they wanted the model to be revised with fewer points on those. I mean, just very technical, but we're still moving forward, and we hope to have a public hearing soon, but we just need the consultant for FEMA to give the blessing.
Is there any ETA beyond in the near future or soon at this time? Should
I hate to say
no?
that because we said we were going to schedule September public hearings, and that
Correct.
was based on what we heard from FEMA in June, and then I would think it was July 1st when they switched consultants on us. I don't have any control over the schedule of that consultant, just my own. And my own will be submitting within the next 2 weeks, or our own, I shouldn't say my own. Yeah.
And what does that notification process look like from there once you
Oh,
get the intel?
We will be sending out letters to everyone within 200
And the
feet of the
involvement?
Harry's Brook, and there'll be notifications on our website, in the newsletter. Yeah, it'll be very public. So we'll have another meeting in here, similar to what we're doing right
Great.
now.
Thank you.
Jim, can you just give a little background on this? 'Cause-
Oh, sure.
And
For-
it's not all of Harry's Brook, right?
No, it's not all of
Okay.
Harry's Brook. In 1984, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, in 1984, the streams were mapped for flooding. At the time, we were a borough and a township, and when they mapped all of the streams, they only mapped the streams in the township. It just so happens that the reach of Harry's Brook between Snowden Lane and North Harrison Street is within the borough, and it is actually the only open stream in the borough. The rest of Harry's Brook is in a culvert, and it starts at Spring Street in the former, what is now an underground lake. And then in 2016, when they updated, even though we had combined, they did not commission a new study for that reach. They just looked at the old models and updated the 2016. They updated the flood insurance rate maps based on new storm data from Superstorm Sandy. So this one stretch of Harry's Brook was the only stream in town that's not mapped, in Princeton that's not mapped. So we commissioned our own consultant to map this stream and get a modification made to the flood insurance rate maps. So, and it's just from Snowden to North Harrison Street.
And what value does this provide to the residents?
This will now give you an approved flood insurance rate map, which can be used for obtaining flood insurance, and it can also be used to determine where your floodplain lies and what restrictions there will be on use of that property. In the past, what has happened is if somebody wanted to make an improvement on their property, they could hire a consultant who would do an estimated method, use an estimated method to determine the limits of the flood on their property. Those estimated methods aren't the greatest things in the world. And in your case, where you live, you're just upstream from a culvert under a road, and that causes backwater. And these estimated methods don't work very well when there's backwater from culverts under roads. So the elevation of the flood is not known in this stretch until we actually did the survey, created the model, and we will get new flood elevations for everybody to understand what the limit of the floodplain is in your backyards.
Can I have a quick question about, with all the new buildings in Princeton? Oh, Maggie Filipiak, and I live in Harrisbrook too. With all the new building that's going on around the shopping center, et cetera, and all the huge big houses that are being built along. The stormwater runoff must be increasing. So what mitigation factors with all the runoff from all these new buildings, et cetera, has been implemented?
Yes. As you heard a couple of speakers say, Princeton goes above and beyond what's necessary. So when the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection came out with new stormwater rules for major projects and minor developments, we created ordinances that actually consider, I shouldn't have said major projects, major and minor development rules. We have an ordinance that we consider major and minor projects, and those are single-family homes. If small and large projects, sorry, God. I know, and I helped write them, so. So if any new development, any addition, landscaping, a new pool, whatever, in Princeton, that increases the impervious area by more than 400 square feet, has to abide by our rules. It's not New Jersey DEP rules, it's our rules. And they have to manage the water quality storm, which at the moment is 1¼ inches, manage it on site. So and they have to do that with green infrastructure, typically a rain garden. So when they come to us for a zoning permit, it gets reviewed by engineering, and if it's more than 400 square feet, we require stormwater management on site so that water gets retained on site. It cannot leave. So 1¼ inches for every square foot of new impervious area. We also require that the 2-year storm be treated basically for pollutants by passing through that green infrastructure. It does not have to be retained. And when we get up to more than 5,000 square feet of new impervious area, then they have to go through an entire analysis of the water quality storm, 2-year storm, 10-year storm, 100-year storm, just like any development has to. I will say, when I was land use engineer a few years ago, a lot of the developers in town for the larger developments, they go above and beyond as well. And I'll use this as an example. The Avalon Apartments in the shopping center, they had 0 requirement for stormwater. They weren't increasing impervious area. It's a parking lot. So we asked them, the planning board asked them, can you do something more? So they put in some rain gardens and a bioretention swale to reduce their runoff into the system that already exists, that goes into one of the tributaries to Harry's Brook that goes through Grover's Park. So they were reducing runoff beyond what was already being coming off that stream. So we work very closely with the developers to make sure that they not only meet but exceed our requirements.
And those major and minor development projects are required to hit certain thresholds of reduction of runoff as well.
Yes,
yeah. Yeah, and looking forward, DEP has over 1,000-page proposal of new rules. And within those new rules, there is regulation of existing impervious that would need to be managed if you're doing development. So in the case of an Avalon, it wouldn't be, okay, you're just replacing an asphalt parking lot with a building roof. You would actually have to do more stormwater management. And Jim Waltman's probably better knowledgeable about this because I haven't had time to look at the 1,000 pages. But yes, I mean, it is getting more and more stringent because everybody realizes that there was so much development that happened before there was stormwater management regulations. And so we've been looking for the mechanism to equitably approach those sites. I know Watershed Institute has been espousing this for probably at least 15 years that I'm aware of trying to get existing sites that don't have stormwater management to be required to do something, and now the state is actually moving towards that with these new rules that might be in place by July next year, I think is the expectation. So we'll see. We don't have any more questions. Thank you all for attending. We appreciate your interest in the topic. And we do have a web page on Princeton's website. If you go to our main website, princetonnj.gov, under projects and initiatives, there should be a web page for the stormwater utility feasibility study. And if you are interested in submitting comments after this meeting, you can send those to engineering@princetonnj.gov.
Will the slide be available?
Yes, we'll put that on the web.
Thank you.
A copy of this recording will also be put on the web page, so people will be able to access that. All right, thank you. Have a good evening.